I typically don't watch new content that's part of well-established franchises that I'm not familiar with. See, for some reason, I have this very strange and annoying complex where I don't feel entitled to engage with something that's part of a long-running, expansive series unless I've gotten a good sense of where it came from, where it's went, and where it is now. Simply put, I feel as if I have to do homework of some kind, otherwise I won't get the most out of the experience and I can't give any worthwhile thoughts on the subject. But I am trying to get over this because it is a fundamentally stupid mindset to have. I shouldn't have to play nearly 15 years worth of a video game franchise just so I can play Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. And honestly, half the time, it's a rule I don't even follow throughout my life. I saw the Resident Evil movies before I ever played any of the games. Back in the day, I played Max Payne 2 before I played the first one. Fucking hell, I saw the Borderlands movie. In a cinema. By myself. It's just one of those stupid arbitrary rules that I make up and enforce on my brain for whatever reason. So when I saw that Fallout was getting a television adaptation, my brain immediately disregarded it as something that I would have to get more acquainted with before I could watch it. Fallout being a series I know absolutely nothing about. But I did keep on seeing ads for it. And little snippets here and there. Something about the tone, the atmosphere, the music, and primarily the fact that Walton Goggins was playing what looked like somebody from Red Dead Redemption crossed with Red Skull with a vitamin D deficiency. I mean, at least as far as his skin tone is concerned. I must admit, I did find it quite alluring. So after a good couple of months of hearing all the rave opinions about it, I decided, fuck it, I'm gonna give this a try. Now, I was initially thinking of doing a bit more research before I delved into this. Maybe play a couple of, or at least one of the games, do a bit of a lore deep dive, maybe watch some analysis videos online, just to get a better understanding of this universe. But before I did any of that, I decided it would actually be a bit more fun for me if I go into the series as oblivious to the games as possible, and maybe even glean from the context of the series what the games themselves might actually be like. I've heard that this is a very faithful adaptation, and it seems to have pleased both fans of the series and newcomers alike, so without further ado, let's talk about Fallout. So starting things off, in what wasn't exactly the biggest boost of confidence in my complete lack of knowledge for the series, I immediately get something wrong. What I initially thought was the 1950s, but just with a lot more advanced technology, turns out to actually be the year 2077. But it's a retro-futuristic 2077, where everything just has the aesthetic of the 1950s. It's all bright sunny colours, checkered dresses, monochrome screens, and everything has a rounded edge for some reason. In what is honestly a pretty fucking chilling opening sequence, we're at a children's birthday party. That's not the chilling part, by the way, where everyone is trying their hardest to ignore or minimise the ominous discussions of war that are happening on the television and the radio. When the powers that be decide that a children's birthday party is not the worst thing you could be doing with your afternoon, when a series of bombs go off in the distance, effectively beginning a nuclear war. Nuclear?
Nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear.
Whatever.
Nuclear.
We then jump 219 years into the future, or rather 219 years further into the future, because it was already the future. Anyway, a very privileged few have been living in lavish underground vaults for the last 2 centuries. Meanwhile, the surface has become a radioactive wasteland of death and anarchy, inhabited by mutated creatures, fiends, ghouls, cannibals, rustlers,
Cutthroats, murderers, bounty hunters, desperados, mugs, pugs, thugs, nitwits, halfwits, dimwits.
all of whom have their own means of survival in the wasteland. There are some who try and create some sense of societal structure and civility, but for the most part it's pretty bleak up top. Meanwhile, the Vault Dwellers, as they are known, are having a lovely time with recreational activities, watching old movies, hanging about with family, growing crops, eating jelly cake, and having semi-incestuous sex with each other. Honestly, I don't know which of those last two sounds more upsetting. The series primarily follows 3 central characters: Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul. Lucy is a resident of Vault 33 who ventures out of the vault for the first time to search for her father after he gets taken by raiders. Maximus is a member of the Brotherhood of Steel, a paramilitary organisation on the surface who have access to advanced technology in the form of massive power-armoured suits called Knights. Max is made squire to one of these Knights whose mission is to apprehend Zep. And lastly, the Ghoul, a mutant bounty hunter who's been around since before the bombs dropped and now needs to regularly take special medicine to stop himself turning into a viral zombie. He's after the bounty on Zep's head. For the record, I do know Michael Emerson from other things, but I just can't help but think about Saw when I see him. And the writers do as well. They knew exactly what they were doing with this. Set the world on fire is fun and everything, but tell me I wasn't the only one who heard this during this scene.
Hello, Mr. Hindle. Or as they called you around the hospital, Zap.
Now, Of course, I am leaving out many of the finer details that are in this show, including other characters who get their own storylines, but that's the most simplified breakdown of the world and the characters that I can give right now. I suppose a pretty good place to start would be what can only be described as my complete misinterpretation of this franchise. See, I was under the impression that Fallout was a very dark and dour series, and I mean, it is. It certainly has its fair share of grim and grittiness and bleak subject matter, but it's also shockingly fun, tongue-in-cheek, and satirical, which I just did not expect. This is honestly one of the funniest series I've watched in quite some time.
Do as I say and Snip Snip doesn't get hurt.
It's a fucking robot.
But crucially, I feel like the humorous tone never compromises the sincerity of the characters or the story that's being told within. It's all incredibly well balanced and feels organic to the characters. I don't know, I guess I just envisioned Fallout having a tone and a mood more akin to something like BioShock. For some reason. I don't know why I came to that conclusion. Maybe it's just because it's another game with a big robot guy on the box art. Oh, speaking of which, another aspect I think I may have been a bit wrong about was before watching the series, I was under the impression that you play as the robot character, or the knight rather. Mostly just because he's the guy I see on the box art for almost every fucking Fallout game. But now, having watched the series, I'm more inclined to believe that you likely play as Lucy, or a vault dweller of some kind. Especially when you consider it in the RPG context. She certainly has the most video game character quest of all of them. She's always interacting with other characters, or NPCs, if you will, with the awkward stiltedness of a dialogue tree. She's constantly resource managing, she has the Pip-Boy device which helps her detect radioactive dangers, which I'm going to assume is some kind of mechanic in the game that allows you to detect dangers or scan your environment for enemies. And despite the fact that the dog hangs about with the Ghoul more often throughout the series, I'm going to assume that the dog is also a companion of some kind. I hope so, at least. I suppose all three of them have main character qualities. They very well could be just different builds of characters from an RPG type game. Is Fallout the type of game where you get to pick your build at the beginning, like Vault Dweller, Wastelander, or Brotherhood of Steel? That'd be pretty cool, I suppose. Back to the series itself though, the thing I really like about this, and what I think it actually does best, is despite the fact that it takes place within the same continuity as the games, which is unusual for video game adaptations I must say, it's actually quite accessible for people like myself who aren't really au fait with the source material. Considering Fallout has been gone since the 90s and it's apparently all in continuity, I was afraid of this being completely impenetrable without some sort of knowledge going in. But alas, that is not the case. The characters all have very palatable motivations, the details of the world are very understandable and organically sprinkled to the audience throughout. I will say that it does sometimes feel like some information is being left to the wayside in favour of focusing on the main trio's story, and towards the back end it does feel like a lot of information starts getting thrown at you, but honestly by that point I felt like they'd completely earned the ability to do that because the pacing, the characters and the writing had been so tight up to that point that a bit of an exposition dump didn't bother me that much. From a production standpoint, the show just looks incredible. It's a perfectly utilised combination of practical effects and CGI. The power armour looks amazing, the Ghoul is now officially the best noseless man effect that there is, the creature designs are disgustingly delightful, and the 1950s retro-futuristic technological aesthetic is just sublime. Fucking hell, that was a mouthful. The old-fashioned jazzy soundtrack really gives this world its whimsical personality, and the comedic timing of some of the needle drops are just exquisite. It looks like a lot of this was also filmed on location, desert wastelands and dilapidated architecture, not too dissimilar to that of a Mad Max movie. Crossover, anyone? Now, I'm sure that this is just bursting at the seams with background details and Easter eggs that diehards of the franchise are just delighted to see. Personally, I just loved how lived in and matter of fact everything felt, because it would after 200 years. You'll see a two-headed cow just walking past the screen very casually, there's a kiosk that buys teeth in exchange for bottle caps which act as currency in the wasteland, or even a group of giant cockroaches attacking you being a very mundane occurrence. What can I say? It feels like a very immersive video game world. And even though I haven't played any of the games, I can still very much appreciate all of the little moments that feel very video game inspired, like bumping into a dodgy merchant who's all like, "What are you buying?"
Got something that might interest you.
Enemy AI having the aiming skills of a fucking stormtrooper.
You couldn't hit water if you fell out of a boat.
And of course, the very common substance that exists in the world that miraculously heals all of our most mortal wounds. That's video game bollocks 101 right away. Fucking hell, in Resident Evil, all it took was a bit of paprika mixed with cannabis and your health was top notch. I suppose that does explain why everyone talks the way they do in the original game.
Don't scare me.
That's what I was going to say.
But just take a look at this. It's forest. Oh my god.
Of the core trio, Lucy is definitely our main character, a mild-mannered, bright-eyed optimist, and she is immediately lovable with her incredibly positive and amiable personality.
Excuse me. Hi. May I approach?
I ain't got weapons.
Oh.
For money?
It's okay. I just want to ask you for directions.
She's always being polite and respectful of others, trying to handle tough or even dire situations with as much kindness and diplomacy as possible, which is undeniably cute at times.
So, why don't we all take a deep breath?
What the fuck are you talking about?
Having lived an incredibly privileged life in Vault 33, she's very naive to the unforgiving ways of the wasteland and unfortunately has to find out the realities of it the, shall we say, less than easy way.
If you help me find him, he'll do whatever you want.
She is a staunch believer in the golden rule.
Do unto others as you'd have done unto you.
Which is certainly a nice rule to always at least consider in most situations, but unfortunately in the world of Fallout, not everyone follows the same belief. As she makes her journey across the wasteland of what's left of America and interacts with the world and other characters, she comes to learn about the harsh ways of existence and the extreme things you have to do in order to survive up top. Around about the time she crosses paths with the Ghoul, she begins to slowly and painfully be broken down as the episodes go on, and her belief in the golden rule is constantly being challenged. Also, their dynamic is some of the best stuff in the whole season. But what's actually great about her character is, despite all of the horrible things she learns and experiences throughout, she never quite loses her ability to look at the world through empathy and fairness. She's a bit like Butters from South Park.
Hello, sir. Postman Butters with a special delivery for you.
I think we're all feeling some tension. Yeah?
Please don't ask me, homie.
Gosh damn it, okay.
Son of a biscuit!
I mean, I thought I was here to be a sex slave.
Are you gonna rape us?
No?
Alright then.
Even after the Ghoul has held her captive, starved her, used her as bait, maimed her, and even sold her to sex slavers.
What? No! What a disgusting idea!
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Organ harvesters. She still chooses to stick with her belief in the golden rule and save his life when he needs it, but with a new attitude.
Golden rule, motherfucker.
She doesn't believe in this
I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
bollocks. No, she goes the extra mile. I've long felt that the big blue Boy Scout archetype of a character who's just an almost impossibly nice, good-natured person that's completely averse to violence and confrontation is becoming a bit underrepresented in a lot of media. Sure, characters who are morally complex and humanly flawed are usually more interesting and emotionally resonant, and this show has no shortage of them, but sometimes a character who's just way nicer and more committed to their ethics than most people are is a good thing for a story, and I think Lucy is an absolutely wonderful example of one. Now, that's not to say that she's completely devoid of internal adversity or negative traits. She can come across as a bit self-righteous sometimes, and is a bit out of touch as to why people on the surface might not give two fucks about the Vault Dwellers. But in all fairness, she has been raised from birth with the belief that the Vault Dwellers are the paragons of righteousness and are going to be the ones who save the world. Or America, rather. America! Fuck yeah! Honestly, it's a fucking miracle she didn't grow up to be more of a self-serving entitled prick. Part of her progression isn't just learning about the ways of the wasteland, it's also about discovering the insidious nature of the vaults and how her and her family are all tied into it. Considering how the season ends and the dark truth that she's forced to confront, there is some implication that Lucy very well could go down a darker path in the future. After she finally tracks down her dad, she discovers that not only is her father partly responsible for the reason the world's in the shit state that it is in now, but is also directly responsible for the death of her mother and countless innocent people who were actually living a thriving life up on the surface. Simply put, her dad's a cunt. I don't know what exactly the writer's intentions are for this character. We'll have to wait and see what comes down the line, but this is the sort of paradigm shift that could send a character spiraling. However, I do like the idea of this character remaining the eternal optimist that she's always been. And there definitely are ways that you can write a character like that and still keep them compelling, but only time will tell. I'm assuming that Lucy is a creation of the series and isn't in the games. I feel as if she was a character from the games, I would have seen at least an image or a thumbnail by accident by now. I think this might be the case for most characters in the series also, although a lot of them do seem pretty integral to the lore and the history of this universe, so I'm curious to see if and how this ties into anything related to the games. Also, if Fallout is an action RPG of some kind, I highly doubt that a character as docile as Lucy would be much use of a character, unless of course Fallout's one of those games where you can do a completely non-lethal run. I mean, she does start off using just sleeping agents and the powers of negotiation, and then eventually winds up using more lethal methods down the line. That's usually the trajectory of my tactical action espionage experiences. Honestly though, I'd still play a video game if the main character was just Lucy being a nerd the whole time. I love Lucy as a character, I think she's a great Fuck! I just said I love Lucy, didn't I? I was trying to avoid saying that. I got this fucking far. Anyway, moving on. We first meet Maximus when he's in training at the Brotherhood of Steel, which, near as I can tell, is some kind of paramilitary group trying to take on the role of heroic peacekeepers in the wasteland. I say trying because a lot of them seem woefully incompetent or just absolute wankers. They come across more like a cult than an actual functional military organization, so I don't really know. We don't spend too much time with them and don't get a good sense of how they operate as a whole. This is definitely one area where I feel like more than likely there's a lot of backstory and lore that's being minimized for the sake of pacing and focusing on Maximus's character. Which is fine, we learn all the stuff we really need to in order for this story to actually work. Many people see them as heroes and they carry out missions for people in the world, but a lot of them are kinda shite at it. Maximus lost his home and his family as a child during a series of bombings that we later find out was orchestrated by Lucy's father, Hank. Again, because he's a cunt. He was rescued and taken in by the Brotherhood, and since then his lifelong goal has to become a respected member of the Brotherhood and don the knight's armor himself one day. Max is more of your classic underdog character who's constantly being stepped on and bullied and wants to prove himself to the world, so much so that he actually sabotages his way to the position of squire for a knight called Titus. Who is a rather discourteous fellow, shall we say.
What's the problem, dipshit?
See, this is what I meant earlier when I said that a lot of these guys come across as just woefully incompetent and stupid. Granted, this guy's one example, so maybe exception, not the rule. But fucking hell, it's bad enough that he's just an absolute prick, but he's also shite at his job. He can't even back up with I'm actually good at what I do. Absolutely get fucked. But thankfully, we don't have to spend too much time with him because he gets the DiCaprio treatment from Cocaine Bear, or more like Methamphetamine Bear in this case. In what's honestly a truly hilarious scene.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Titus gets his tiny tender tuchus torn apart, and even whilst mortally wounded, Titus cannot have a single shred of humility and just has a complete lack of self-awareness and self-preservation because he continues to berate and insult Maximus and even tells him that he's going to be blamed and eventually murdered for this situation. So naturally, Max's response is to just let him die, showing that Maximus doesn't quite follow the same rule as our golden goosey Lucy. Max then decides to assume the identity of Titus and then suits up in the armor and ventures to complete the mission himself and claim all of the glory, even though he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's always getting stuck, he's falling face first into the dirt, he's getting jumped by raiders, or just being shut down completely. But like a true underdog, he keeps getting back on his feet and trying as hard as he can. He's certainly a lot better than this fucking whinge.
Where were you? Huh?
Max's real shift in character comes when he meets Lucy and the two join forces. They have a very strange yet endearing chemistry with each other, which makes sense because they're both weirdos from strange worlds. It's a cute relationship and it leads to some really bizarre, hilarious interactions between the two.
You wanna have sex?
You mean use my cock?
Yeah.
There's a brief period when the two wind up inside a different vault at one point, vault number 4 specifically, who happily open their doors to the surface and allow refugees in for help. Maximus gets to experience a little bit of luxury life for a bit, while Lucy is just suspicious of the vault because of the amount of mutants and the strange behaviours going on inside. After discovering that Vault 4 seemed to worship the woman that kidnapped her father, Lucy decides to do a bit of Scooby-Dooing about and discovers that Vault 4 are up to some heinous shit in the science department. We're talking Hitler scientist stuff. We later find out that it was in fact the previous ones in charge of Vault 4 that were performing horrible experiments, and the current runners overthrew them and now live peacefully. For breaching this peace, Lucy is sentenced to death.
Death!
by exile.
And despite settling in quite nicely and having fun with television, comfy robes, and aphrodisiacs apparently.
These are called oysters? You want one? They make you feel so good.
I was wondering if I could stick my penis in your vagina.
Max, having missed the woeful misunderstanding that just took place, decides in an act of love to save Lucy and assault several members of Vault 4. He's also sentenced to death.
Death! By exile.
You'll be killed almost immediately on the surface by Lord knows what. That's why we're giving you 2 weeks of supplies to take with you. Thank you.
Yeah, as it turns out, Vault 4 is actually kind of a cool place and probably one of the best places you could live in the Fallout universe, it seems. Max has much more of an understanding of the brutality and lack of civility in the wasteland, but Lucy's selfless golden rule nature does rub off on him in the process, to the point that by the end, when Max has actually achieved the glory that he wanted from the Brotherhood, his desires and his priorities actually seem to lay somewhere else now. It'll be very interesting to see how his relationship with Lucy develops down the line, now that he's discovered that his family and his home were decimated by Lucy's father. Like I said, I was always under the impression that you play as a knight in the games, and that very well could still be the case. My brain could be going a completely different direction, mind you, but I honestly can't figure out the role that the Brotherhood might play in the games. I think they might be boss battles or high-level enemy types or something. I feel like if you were playing as a knight, you'd be way too overpowered. But maybe I'm just overestimating their capabilities. Like I said, they do come across as very incompetent at times. Towards the end, a bunch of them get their arses handed to them by the Ghoul. Speaking of which...
Feo, fuerte y fumó.
Damn, y'all ain't got me working up an appetite.
Now, I alluded to earlier that the Ghoul was one of, if not my main reason for wanting to watch this series in the first place. First of all, I didn't even know that undead revenant cowboys were a thing in Fallout, and I've been quite a fan of Walton Goggins ever since, but not because he called the Predator an offensive slur that one time.
Die, you space Who do you think you're dealing with, huh?
Seriously though, there was a lot of things drawing me to this series, but this guy was who I had my eye on. And, well, in the words of Walton Goggins himself...
Well, I'll be double dog damn!
Yeah, the Ghoul's a pretty fucking awesome character, who knew? It's not just because he's a cold, calm and cool collected bounty hunter who carries himself with such composure and assuredness, but he's just such a fascinating character to watch and unravel. His motives are wrapped up in much more mystery than the other two main characters are, but you as a viewer just know there's a lot more going on under that crusty chrome dome of his. You really feel the longevity of his existence in the world. He's seen and done most everything one would probably have to do in order to survive over the course of 200 years. If Lucy is a character entering and discovering this world for the first time with all of her familiar tools, ethics and education as guidance, and Maximus is a part of this world who has an understanding of it based on the faction he's with but doesn't have much field experience, the Ghoul just is this world. He has the most perspective anyone can have, being from the old world and surviving his way through this new one longer than anyone else has managed to, completely numb to the violence surrounding him.
I'd offer you one of these cherry tomatoes, but you got a hole in your neck.
He's unpredictable, intelligent, and an absolute charisma machine.
You know your kind ain't welcome here.
Well, maybe not. But I'm gonna make myself welcome.
Really?
The only time he ever really seems to lose his cool is when his prescription gets destroyed.
Dear Lord, that's the loudest profanity I've ever heard.
But what's really clever about his character and the way his story is structured throughout the series is because he doesn't have the same sort of arc in the present day as Lucy or Maximus, most of his development comes when we get more insight into his character through flashbacks to before the bombs dropped, when we see the man that he once was, an actor named Cooper Howard. Cooper became a poster boy for the corporation that built the vaults, Vault Tech. I know, really fucking creative name. His wife Barb is a high-ranking executive for the company, and over the course of these flashbacks, we see how their relationship became more and more strained because of their differing opinions on the company. Through his own sleuthing about, he discovers the dirty goings-on, which eventually leads to him having to separate from his wife and then share custody of their child. As a result of his disassociation from Vault Tech, he becomes blacklisted from the movie industry and has to become a children's entertainer in order to make a living, until the war starts. Pretty fucking tragic. He's one of the few characters who know the dark truths of the world and the people responsible for the way things are, but he is also, I think anyway, the only character who's actually been alive and existing the entire time, with nothing to do but keep living and fighting through the harshness of the wasteland, becoming a fearsome legend in the process. Yet, despite the brutality that he's endured and committed throughout the years, he still has a personal code and a level of sympathy within him. I particularly love the scene when he comes across a fellow ghoul who's missed the dosage and is turning feral. He could just kill this guy and take what he needs and immediately move on, but instead he takes a moment to talk to him for a bit and distracts his mind by making him think about the old days when he used to enjoy ice cream and apple pie before he shoots him in the head. Granted, he does cannibalize him afterwards, but still. For obvious reasons, he has a very particular disdain for vault dwellers, which is why he treats Lucy in the very ungentlemanlike fashion that he does, or actual gentlemanlike fashion, depending on who you ask. I also love the little arc that he has with the dog throughout the series. He starts off by literally killing her, which is the ultimate screenwriting signifier for "This is the bad guy." But afterwards, he does decide to save the dog's life. Now, you could argue that he only did that because the dog would lead him to his target, but I do like to think that he felt a little bit bad about hurting the dog. This feels especially even more likely when we learn later that back before the bombs dropped, he had a very opposing feeling with his wife about the rule of no dogs allowed in the vault. I imagine even his hardened present-day self holds the philosophy that dogs are better than people. Try and prove me wrong.
Mishka, I love you.
I love you.
He does decide to abandon the dog later on after she leads him where he needs to, but as if fate itself was trying to tell him something, they cross paths again later, and he decides to let her tag along this time, and he even gives her a proper name. He's just an effortlessly magnetic character. He gets some of the slickest action sequences in the series, and he even has his own distinctive yodeling theme every time he appears on screen. It will be interesting to see where his dynamic with Lucy goes now that the two have formed an alliance with each other and seemingly have a common enemy. We find out that Hank was one of the executives at Vault-Tec in 2077, and the reason that the Ghoul has been so determined to survive so long is he's under the impression that his family may still be alive after all of this time, and Hank likely knows their whereabouts. In the prologue, while the bombs are dropping, we do see Cooper with his daughter fleeing for somewhere, and we learn nothing of what happened to her after that. I just assumed that she died in the ensuing war, but since he says,
"Where's my fucking family?"
"Where's my family?" and not "Where's my wife?" implies otherwise. Barb does make it very clear that she's making the decisions that she's making to ensure the safety of her family, so where exactly Cooper lost connection with his daughter is still a mystery to be answered at this point. I'm sure he'll fill in the gaps for us in Season 2. Now, I am not even going to speculate on the possibilities of the Ghoul or just ghouls in general in the games. All I'll say is this: if playing as a ghoul has never been an option in Fallout before, it'll definitely be one at some point now.
You just give it a little time.
Outside of the main trio, we also see what's happening within Vault 33, where we follow Lucy's brother Norman, who's investigating the suspicious goings-on of the vault and the shady leadership of adequately visioned Al. Despite trying to gain support from his cousin, Norm seems to be the only one really suspicious of what's happening and wants to find out what's going on. We find out that leadership and power within the vaults, or at the very least Vaults 31, 32 and 33, are carefully curated, and that despite them having the illusion of freedom, it's still very much a controlled society. Through Norm's investigation in the flashbacks with Cooper, we find out that Vault-Tec essentially helped orchestrate the nuclear war to gain proper profit from the 100 vaults that they invested in. The plan being that all executives of the company, which include Lucy's father, would cryogenically freeze themselves in Vault 31, and as the years go on, sequentially are awoken to maintain control and position of leadership in the interlinked Vaults 31, 32 and 33, conditioning the inhabitants to be quiet, credulous sheep. The ultimate end goal being that they would outlive the inhabitants of the wasteland and other vaults, ensuring their 200-year-old plan to rebuild America in their own image would remain intact.
What a bunch of cunts.
It's even revealed that Lucy's mother discovered a place on the surface called Shady Sands, which is where Maximus was from. Not only was a peaceful colony, but also a thriving community that actually suggested the idea of a good life on the surface wasn't an impossibility. But because this wasn't part of Hank the Wank's plan, he opted to just have it destroyed and left his wife to be ghoulified.
That is evil.
Norm manages to eventually sneak his way into Vault 31 and discovers the remaining Vault Tech executives in cryopods. He gets locked inside, unfortunately, and his only options are either starve to death or freeze himself in one of the empty pods. I suppose the implication is that Barb and possibly even Cooper's daughter is in there somewhere, but who knows at this point.
These are Bud's buds.
I'll take this opportunity now to make the assumption that the games take place in other vaults. They do make mention that there's well over 100 across the United States. That in and of itself leaves the door wide open for options in the future. I am very curious to see what some of these other vaults look like though. I'm also curious as to how and if this even ties into any games specifically, because the more I think about it, the more I'm inclined to believe that this is probably its own story and very separate from the games. But on the other hand, a lot of these characters do seem quite important to the history and lore of this universe. Characters like the Ghoul, Hank McClane, and Lee Moldaver all seem pretty integral. Now, obviously, there's many dangling threads and unanswered questions left, either to be explained in future seasons, or have already been explained and are inferable from the games. For example, the character of Moldaver in general. How is she alive in the wasteland in the present day? She wasn't part of the Vault Tech executives, so how did she have access to cryogen tech? Did she even have access to cryogen tech? Did she invent it herself? She was able to invent cold fusion successfully, so maybe she did. I'm also going to assume that the last shot of the series is a reference to something that I'm not getting. It felt like a dramatic reveal for something I was supposed to recognize, but I didn't. Is this the infamous new Vegas place that I've heard so much about over the years of gaming I've done? I imagine I'll find out at some point in the not too distant future anyway. I will be playing the games now because I just need to know more about this wild as fuck universe. I'm sorry if this is very scattershot and all over the place, but honestly, I really just wanted to ramble about something. I didn't expect to enjoy this series as much as I did, so I decided, what a fun place to start. But beyond that, this series actually made me appreciate the Last of Us adaptation a little bit more. Now don't get me wrong, I thought that was a terrific series and I am extremely excited for season 2, but I don't think I fully appreciated the impact that it could have and probably did have. Being a big fan of both Last of Us games, I didn't come away with the series feeling anything more than this is just a very good companion piece to the game, but it's never going to compare. But now after watching Fallout, a series based on games I'm completely unfamiliar with, not only drawing me in, but making me want to play the games and delve deeper into the world and the universe. Even if I wind up not liking the games, which is a very real possibility, mind you, I am still going to absolutely adore this series and want to know more about the universe and the characters inside of it. I now appreciate that the first season of The Last of Us could have given that feeling to someone else.
War never changes. You look out at this wasteland, looks like chaos, but there's always somebody behind the wheel. And that's who I want to talk to.